They told me I was too successful to deserve it, too independent, too fortunate, too me. That's how my parents justified handing the one thing I had been promised since childhood, the family heirloom necklace, to my younger sister. Hannah. It wasn't about the diamonds. It wasn't even about tradition. It was about respect, about promises, about the way they looked at me, not as their child, but as someone who had outgrown her place in the family when they slipped that necklace around Hannah's neck. Smiling as if it had always belonged to her, something inside me cracked. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just smiled. And in that smile, I buried the vow that would carry me through the months that followed. If they wanted to treat me as the stranger at their table, then I'd show them what it felt like to be devoured by shadows of their own making, because family betrayal isn't just about blood. Sometimes it's about bones and what you do when you break them. My family wasn't rich, but they carried themselves like royalty. At the center of that illusion was the necklace, a heavy chain of platinum, set with diamonds and sapphires, passed down through 4 generations. According to every family story I grew up with, it was meant for the eldest daughter. And I was the eldest. My parents drilled that narrative into me as a child. One day this will be yours, Claire, my mother would say, polishing the necklace with reverence. You must honor our traditions. You must keep it safe. So I worked. I studied. I became everything they told me to be. First in my family to go to college. First to buy my own home. First to earn more in a year than my parents had made in a decade. My success wasn't just mine, it was theirs. Or at least that's what I believed. Then came Hannah. My younger sister was the opposite of me in every possible way. Where I was ambitious, she was aimless. Where I was disciplined, she was reckless. Jobs slipped through her fingers like sand. Relationships too. But no matter how many mistakes she made, my parents stood behind her with excuses. She just needs time. She'll find her way. I never begrudged Hannah her softness. I thought that was what family was for, to catch the ones who stumble. But slowly, something shifted. Family gatherings turned into a stage where my parents paraded Hannah's smallest accomplishments as though they outweighed everything I built. When I bought a house, they called me lucky. When Hannah got a job at a boutique that lasted 3 months, they said, she's finally finding her passion. I laughed it off at first, but deep inside there was a slow spreading rot. The final fracture began on the night of my grandmother's funeral. We sat in the living room after the service, the air heavy with grief and whiskey. My father stood, holding the necklace case. My breath caught. I knew what was coming. This is it, I thought. Finally, the promise kept. But instead of turning to me, he crossed the room to Hannah. He opened the velvet box, lifted the necklace like a crown, and clasped it around her neck. You deserve this, he said, voice shaking with false pride. Claire has her career, her money. But you, Hannah, you carry our family's heart. This belongs to you. The room blurred. I remember Hannah's smug little smile, the glint of diamonds against her collarbone, the way my mother dabbed her eyes as though she were watching some sacred coronation. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Later that night, when I confronted them, my father's words cut deeper than any knife. You don't need it, Claire. You've already taken more than your share of life's fortune. Don't be greedy. Greedy. That was the word they used to erase decades of promises. From that night onward, something broke permanently between us. Phone calls grew cold. Invitations dwindled. They stopped asking about my life altogether, but silence is a powerful thing. And in that silence, I began to plan because if they wanted to treat me as the outsider, I would show them what an outsider could do. After the funeral, I tried to convince myself I could live with it. It's just a necklace, I told myself. Just a cluster of stones and metal, no more valuable than the love of my family. But it wasn't just a necklace. It was the years of being told I was the heir. It was the nights I stayed up studying while Hannah snuck out to drink. It was the sacrifices no one remembered, the promises no one kept. I swallowed it. For months, I pretended nothing had changed. I attended dinners. I smiled through gritted teeth. I congratulated Hannah when she flaunted the necklace at parties like she was a queen. And then came the birthday dinner. My mother hosted it at their house. A cramped two-story with floral wallpaper that smelled of dust and nostalgia. The whole extended family was there, cousins, uncles, aunts. The air buzzed with laughter and cheap wine. Halfway through dessert, Hannah stood up, topped her glass, and announced she had something to share. "I've decided to pawn the necklace," she said. Smiling as though she had announced an engagement, the room went still. "What?" I whispered, too quietly for anyone but the cousin beside me to hear. Hannah laughed, twirling the diamonds between her fingers. "Relax, I need the money. Student loans, car repairs, life stuff, you know." I figured it's just jewelry. Why let it sit in a box when it can actually help me? Gasps rippled through the family. My mother fanned herself dramatically. My father stammered, "But it's an heirloom." Hannah shrugged. "Tradition is nice, but tradition doesn't pay rent." That's when my uncle, drunk and careless, turned to me. "Didn't your parents promise that necklace to you, Claire? Guess Hannah needed it more, huh?" The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, exactly. It was worse. It was pitying. It painted me as the greedy one, the girl too successful to need a family's love. I excused myself to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I gripped the sink until my knuckles turned white. My reflection blurred through tears, the taste of bile rising in my throat. They had taken everything. Not just the necklace, but the story behind it. The inheritance of respect, of legacy. Now Hannah would pawn it, and its value would vanish into her debts. I stayed in that bathroom for 20 minutes, long enough for my breathing to steady. When I finally emerged, I wore the same polite smile I'd mastered over the years. The rest of the night passed in a haze. But something in me had crystallized. A week later, I visited my parents, hoping for some shred of remorse. Instead, I was met with indifference. "You can't blame her," my mother said, stirring sugar into her tea. "She needs it more than you." "She's struggling," my father added. "You have everything, Claire. A good job, a good apartment money. Why can't you just be happy for her?" Happy for her. They weren't blind. They had chosen their favorite, and they had chosen to paint me as the villain. That was the moment the betrayal turned final. That was when I stopped trying to earn their love. I nodded, thanked them for the tea, and walked out of the house. I didn't slam the door. I didn't curse or cry. I only whispered 3 words into the autumn air as I left. Never again, from then on. Every family text went unanswered. Every phone call went ignored. Birthdays, holidays, weddings, I sent nothing but silence. But silence wasn't enough, because at night, when the world was quiet, I thought about the necklace, about Hannah's smug grin, about my parents' dismissive tone. I thought about how quickly promises turn to ashes, and in those hours, I began weaving the threads of something darker, something precise, a plan. Revenge doesn't arrive like a storm. It grows like mold, slow, patient, invisible until it consumes the walls around you and my family. They had no idea they were already breathing it in. I started small, the kind of small that looks like coincidence until it's not. I couldn't undo the past or pry diamonds back from a pawn shop, but I could make the present brittle thin as glass so that every careless touch would shatter it first. I gathered information. I watched them the way a spy watches a target routine, patterns, weaknesses. My father took his cash withdrawals on Tuesdays at the corner ATM. My mother posted photos of the plants she was proud of every Sunday. Hannah loved late-night shopping sprees and posted receipts like trophies. Birthdays, bills, habits, ordinary things that said, plainly and without drama, where they were vulnerable, I did not go to them. They had taught me silence as punishment. I learned to use silence as a weapon that my plan had three parts: financial, social, and the one they would never see coming. Financial: expose the family's reliance on appearances. Social: turn their friends and relatives into mirrors that reflected only what they feared. Surprise: a slow, quiet erosion of their sense of safety and intimacy with their unease that felt almost supernatural. Step 1: the bank statements. Hannah had always boasted about how much time she spent managing the little boutique she worked at hours she never recorded, income she never showed. I knew the boutique owner was my neighbor's cousin. It took one polite phone call, and suddenly I had access to loan receipts and payroll records that didn't line up with Hannah's bragging. I made copies, arranged them neatly, and then left an anonymous envelope at my mother's mailbox. Inside, a single photocopy of an altered payroll summary and a note that read, simply, maybe honesty was the intended heirloom. Within a week, the boutique's owner called Hannah in a panic. Someone was accusing her of skimming. She played innocent on social media, crying about false accusations and family betrayal. My parents whispered, worried and furious, and Hannah's smile slipped. She posted less. She started answering texts in shorter sentences. Small cracks. Small victories. Step 2: friends and neighbors. My parents prided themselves on their social circle. They crafted their identity on polite charity and perfectly arranged tea parties. I used that subtly, surgically. I sent carefully worded emails from an anonymous account to a few of their closest friends about a financial discrepancy involving the family estate. I hinted at improprieties that sounded plausible: unpaid bills, suspicious withdrawals, favoritism shown to one daughter. The rumor did what rumors always do. It grew. Invitations stopped coming. Phone calls became perfunctory. My mother began to ask, in hurt whispers during grocery runs, whether anyone had said anything about them. The social skin they wore thinned. But the third piece, what I like to call the bone-deep part, was the slow haunting. I didn't believe in ghosts, at least not at first. But I had learned that belief isn't required for fear to take root. Perception is enough. People living in a house start hearing their own regrets when the house is quiet. I decided to make my parents listen to theirs. I started leaving small, impossible things. A porcelain cup moved half an inch to the left on the kitchen shelf. A garden gnome turned to face the window. A single rose petal placed on the pillow my father used on his office couch. Things so minor they could be dismissed as absent-mindedness, but persistent. Night after night, when my mother found the petal, she asked quietly if the gardener had been in. There was no gardener. When my father discovered a single shoe tied neatly outside the back door, his hands trembled as though he had aged decades in a single breath. I didn't stop there. I timed the lights in their house to flicker at the same moment. The old clock chimed 3 a.m, the hour my grandmother had died. I left a voicemail on their landline with no voice, just the faintest echo of someone whispering a phrase my grandmother used to say, "Remember the promise." The effect was more powerful than I expected. My mother started waking at night, checking windows, asking if the doors were locked. My father, who had once boasted about never being surprised, now walked the hallway with his shoulders rounded and his eyes scanning, like a man who'd mislaid his sense of belonging. Small wins turned into small losses for them. Hannah lost clients and saved receipts turned into scrutiny. My parents lost friends, and gradually, the naive certainty that their lineage could protect them. They began to argue in the kitchen, voices sharp and quick, the kind of arguments that retrace the map of a failed marriage. I watched these moments unfold like a cold spectator, drinking in the evidence that my plan, patient and unshowy, was working. But strategy needs contingency. I anticipated their attempts to find the perpetrator. They would hire someone, call the police, scream at each other. I built layers of plausible deniability. When my mother accused Hannah of staging the incidents for attention, I let that suspicion fester. When my father considered changing the locks, I left the spare key under a different pot. I made their paranoia efficient, economical. Every move they made only fed the next step of my plan. There were nights I almost faltered when I imagined the look on my mother's face if she'd known it was me placing the rose petal, or the way my father might collapse at the reveal. But I steered myself away from pity. They had taught me that love comes with reservations. They'd taught my sister that debts were acceptable if they were pretty. They had used a family relic to erase my past. I kept the vow I had made in the aftermath of the funeral. No mercy, no sudden confessions. Only the quiet, inevitable crumbling dot, and as the walls of their family life thinned, a strange thing happened. Whispers of karma began to curl among our relatives. People used words like unlucky and bad timing. They speculated about misfortune, when the reality was less mystical and more particular. It was someone who had been hurt and decided, carefully, to return the injury in ways that could not be pinned to a single moment. The tension rose, threaded with a promising sense of justice that was mercifully for my mind to administer. By the time the first major collapse happened, a bank audit that uncovered a series of misclassified accounts belonging to my parents, charitable donations. I had built a trail of breadcrumbs that led all the way back to their doorstep, but not to me. The audit triggered investigations, whispers, and an ugly, expensive legal review. My parents sat across from the investigator like two children facing a teacher, hands small and apologetic. Hannah's pawnshop debt lined up with the audit's timing. It looked opportunistic, sloppy, and above all, painfully real. They asked each other who could have done such a thing. They pointed at me in private, then caught themselves. They suspected outsiders. The more they searched, the less they found. And the more they feared, I had not yet delivered the final blow. I was still weaving, but the pattern was visible, now a tapestry of small humiliations that, when combined, made the family's reputation leak like a hairline crack in the dam. They had mocked me with a necklace and then pawned it. I had repaid them in the one currency that mattered to them, the slow, public erosion of certainty. And in the silence of my apartment, where the city hummed like a distant warning, I allowed myself to imagine the moment when everything would finally fall. The night I chose was ordinary. Rain whispered against the windows like a secret being told too quietly. My parents' house smelled of old lavender and fear. I pulled on gloves, slotted my phone into airplane mode, and walked the last familiar road as if I were returning something I had borrowed. Pressed the buzzer and watched through the frosted glass as Hannah opened the door. The necklace tucked beneath her blouse like a talisman she no longer understood. She smiled too bright, too careless. Pride had a way of dulling the senses. Inside, the house was lit in the soft, sentimental glow my mother favored. Photographs lined the hallway. Holidays, birthdays, staged happiness. They looked at me like a museum would look at a vandal who'd been given the keys. I did not speak. I set down a small package on the coffee table. A cake, the kind with cheap frosting, an old joke from when we were children. Hannah laughed. My mother fussed about the crumbs. My father poured tea with hands that trembled as if some small electric current ran under his skin. Then I pressed play on the speaker. I'd hidden beneath the sofa cushions. The recording started with soft static. Then my mother's voice unmodified reading entries from an old ledger she kept in the study. The voice was ordinary. The words were not. In them, she admitted to funneling charitable donations into accounts that lined her friends' pockets. In them, my father laughed about creative accounting while the family donated dinners and photo ops to the same charities that never reported a single receipt. In them, Hannah's name appeared next to payments and listless invoices, her boutique purchases paid for with hush money and misdirected checks. They turned pale. The room became a tight thing, like a throat closing. Next, I fed the recording to an anonymous email and a social media account I had created. Tax records, forged receipts, photos of deposit slips, every carefully arranged piece of evidence I'd compiled over months landed on inboxes and timelines. The posts were written in plainest language. Look closer. Not everything is as it seems. They went viral in the small network that mattered, the cousins who ran local blogs, the neighbors who loved gossip. A reporter called. A neighbor recorded a clip on their phone and shared it. The boutique's manager texted Hannah. The bank called my parents' accountant. Hannah's face crumpled first. The necklace felt heavy on her chest, as if it suddenly knew the full weight of its history. She stumbled back, clutching at the collarbone that had worn her smiles like armor. My father tried to laugh it off. My mother's mouth opened and closed. Words failed them in a way they had never failed me. By morning, a legal notice sat on their doorstep. By afternoon, the boutique closed its doors under investigation. The family's social calendar evaporated. Friends who had sipped tea in their living room now wore cautious expressions and looked away. But the worst came last. At the town hall meeting 2 weeks later, an older neighbor, someone my parents had once bannered with at every charity raffle, stood and asked, with a trembling, simple voice, whether anyone had considered the cost of prioritizing appearances over honesty. The room filled with murmurs. People who had supported my parents' image began to measure the gaps. Between their words and their actions, they had been shamed in public. They had been stripped of the story they'd told themselves. And I watched them feel it in their bones. It was quick. It was merciless. It was exactly the kind of justice my grandmother had called balancing the scales. I left the necklace on the kitchen table when I walked out that night. I did not take it. I let it glint under the lamplight, a small, hard thing that had finally been seen for what it was, neither crown nor prize, but proof. After the storm, silence settled differently. Where there had once been a family that wore civility like armor, there was now a quieter, smaller house. My parents took calls from lawyers. Hannah worked odd jobs and stopped posting receipts like trophies. Our relatives whispered less and looked at me with a complicated sort of respect, equal parts fear and curiosity. What did I feel? Relief at first. Satisfaction next. And then, in the small hours, a hollow that felt like grief. Revenge is tidy in the telling, but messy in the living. I had dismantled their certainty. I had matched their cruelty with a cold, deliberate precision. But I had also cut a road between us that might never be repaired. There is a lesson, if you want one. Promises matter. So do the people you choose to protect them. I had been taught to keep my head down and follow the map others drew for me. When the map was burned, I drew a new one with the ink made from their own choices. Some say I went too far. Others say I got what I deserved. I cannot tell you which is truer. I can tell you only what I know, that when you are betrayed by the ones who promise to keep you, justice becomes a private language. What would you have done in this situation?